Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers-Kamen, your host. For more than 13 years, I've been handcrafting these sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, I love spotlighting diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. I invite you to listen up and change the way you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Alrighty then, let's dive in. This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about the Tribe Drive, examining human instincts, beliefs, and behaviors. My guest today is Dr. David Samson. He is the author of Our Tribal Future, How to Channel Our Foundational Human Instincts into a Force for Good. David is an evolutionary anthropologist at University of Toronto. He has studied wild chimpanzees in their natural habitat and worked closely with hunter-gatherer communities. In his new book, Our Tribal Future, he explores the evolved instinct to belong to a tribe and how we can best channel this instinct into the 21st century. David is also part of the CIRCE project, Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative. Welcome, David. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and I am really excited about the CIRCE series and how we can educate the public to be more mentally fit and more discerning when it comes to how we think, how we behave, how we act, and how we interact with society. Talk a little bit about Our Tribal Future. What is the science of tribalism?
Yeah, so I think one of the best ways we can broach this topic is actually by trying to compress the vast amount of natural history that we're talking about here that set up the psychological and spiritual and mental components of what makes us happy. It's one of the focuses of your podcast. One of the best ways to get at this, I think, is to think of the 1.8 million years of evolutionary history in the context of a movie. So imagine human evolution was a 100-minute movie. This is your average length on any movie. And in the first minute, something really interesting happens. We go from our Australopithecine ancestors that were living in trees, essentially. They were chimpanzees from the waist up. And we go from that moment to living in the savanna grasslands. And we start forming and living and dwelling within camps. So a camp, anthropologically speaking, is a group of individuals, about 20 to 30 adults, that are working together for the shared project of survival. They're going out, they're hunting, they're gathering, they're harvesting, and they're bringing back these resources and basically sharing amongst the group. And they're also alloparenting with each other, watching each other's kids, making sure that somebody's awake at night. And this really radically changed what it meant to be a human. And so this was the advent of our genius. This was 1 minute into the movie. And then something basically really interesting happens. 84 minutes later, you would need a David Attenborough to spice up the documentary because it would be pretty boring after that innovation. It'd be pretty, natural history based. And at 84 minutes in the movie, something really fascinating happens. Groups start expanding out of their basic core home ranges, which are really small, 30 kilometers maybe in diameter. And they start trading with other groups. So much so that you see in the archaeological record a signature of an us and a them, the kinds of tools that we have versus the kinds of tools that they have, right? And so probably around 300,000 years ago, which was 84 minutes in the movie, you had tribes evolve. And at this point, it might be worthwhile to define what this is. A tribe is an intersubjective belief network that signals coalitionary alliance to bootstrap trust among strangers. So it's a way to get beyond the face-to-face cognitive limitations of having to remember who to trust and knowing that if somebody's emitting the right team signals, I want to cooperate with them. And so here we have at 84 minutes this adaptation. And it takes up until about a minute in the movie where things start going out of control. It's like a science fiction thriller in the last minute, because in the last minute, we become the sole inheritors of the earth. We outcompete Neanderthals. And I think it's because of this tribe drive. We were mastering this symbolic way to create these coalitions, right? And then with 30 seconds left, there is the advent of sedentary society. And we start domesticating animals. We start dwelling in one place as opposed to moving around. And I think this was one of the first moments in the human movie where we start really departing from what we had been doing for 99 and a half minutes before, which was dwelling in camps together, right? And so it takes up until the next 10,000 years, we have with the last half second in the movie, the most radical departure, and that is the invention of the nuclear family. And this was done by Levittown in the 1950s. And this was never a pattern that we exhibited, that our ancestors experienced for 99 and a half minutes of the movie. And then all of a sudden we create the McDonald's of social patterns with this very isolating environment. And that puts us in a state of massive mismatch, right? And then in the last second, in the last millisecond, all the 5 billion people that are online start engaging in social media. And we wonder why there's all this political tribalism and all this competition and mismatch. It's because of this moment in time where we started diverging radically from how the movie played out for most of it.
That is fascinating. And when you talk about like the calls, right, that allows you to recognize yourself in the other, it is so reminiscent of what's going on right now.
Yeah, totally. And I think this concept of evolutionary mismatch, it's something I focus on in the book, especially in chapter 2. It's the idea that we're evolved for how things were, not how things are. So let me give a crisp example here from the animal kingdom. So there is the South African jewel beetle, and the beetle is in a particularly precarious state right now because the males are attracted to, they find sexy, these big pits in the wings of their mates. They're like these little brown oval pits. They reflect light. And right now, there's been a massive reduction in the population sizes because they're being tricked by beer bottles that have bigger, sexier pits. So these males will go, there'll be 5 or 6 of them trying to mate with a beer bottle instead of an actual partner.
Poor babies.
There's been, no babies, right? So this is a classic example of how when a species is confronted with signals that hijack it in its system, it can be extremely wellness reducing and maybe even arguably happiness reducing for that species.
This is fascinating. I was listening to a piece the other day on PRX about light pollution and how through the Industrial Revolution moving forward, how the massive amounts of light have actually damaged and reduced certain species like frogs, because frogs only call in complete darkness.
Oh, yeah. No, not only that. So this is actually my wheelhouse. I've studied circadian rhythms and sleep in many different primate species and small scale societies. So the circadian rhythm, it's this crucial cue from light and temperature in the environment, and it probably predates even sleep. So just think of it this way. What a circadian rhythm is trying to do is it's trying to basically give an individual predictive power in its environment. It's trying to say, be active now and be asleep now. Right. And what we've done is we've totally thrown a wrench in this fundamental biological system because we have totally temperature regulated rooms. I imagine you have AC right now on in your room. I certainly do.
Amen to that.
Amen to that, right?
Because it's sweltering right now.
It's sweltering. And we have these blue wave emitting lights that we can turn on anytime in 24 hours. And so I'm happy you brought this up, because this is another state where humans are in an evolutionary mismatch, because what we're doing is we're basically throwing these really poor, crappy cues on our entire neuroendocrine system at, say, 10, 11 at night. We're watching these big screen TVs, LCD screen TVs, or looking at a computer screen, and it's inhibiting our capacity to make melatonin. Melatonin is the principal sleep-wake regulation hormone. And so it's, again, a state of mismatch that we've thrown ourselves in based on our evolved physiology. So that's a wonderful example, Lisa. I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, and what you say makes me think about how technology both contributes towards the advancement of society, and then we're shooting ourselves in the foot, because by these circadian rhythms being disrupted in the human world and the rest of the animal kingdom, it also impairs our ability to function, our executive functioning, how we process, how we make decisions, how we go out in the world and behave.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think bringing this back to our proposed idea here of social mismatch, you can start to see the evidence in the same way that you see that people are having sleep disorders. The Surgeon General just had an advisory talking about social isolation. I don't know if you saw this.
I did. It was great. And
it is actually
through his own
great
experience, right? His own lived experience served as the model for this, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's heroic. I'm actually really glad that was done, because the stats are pretty terrifying right now when it comes to social isolation and how damaging it is. So for adolescents, 2/3 are saying they're overwhelmingly anxious right now. Over 50% say they regularly feel hopeless most of the time. 40% of college students are reporting they're too depressed to function most days. And 10% have had suicidal ideation in the past year. And these rates have doubled since 2009. So this is very, very serious. And for adolescents, it's one thing because you have a developing and growing mind. In adults, it's proving to be absolutely deadly. So loneliness is predictive of increased broad-based morbidity, mortality. It makes your brain harder to change and grow through neuroplasticity. It predicts drug use, suicide. It negatively influences your sleep. And so Sarah Rose Kavanaugh actually said in 2019 in her book, she said, quote, "Loneliness is tied to being more likely to die at any time of any cause at any phase of life," end quote. And so like when we talk about mismatch, that's one of the things is like our ancestors evolved in a much more tight social network. And I think this is one of the ways that we can start harvesting happiness, is start thinking about creating intentional proximity and intentional community in our own lives.
It's interesting that you talk about this in the context of emotional and physical well-being. And I'm also thinking about, our tribal future, right? The desire to be connected, right? Like we humans are driven and long for connection and belonging. And I would imagine that there's research that supports that part of this fractured society where people are joining these tribal cultures on the internet, right?
Yep.
These tribal
Internet
groups,
native tribes. Yeah.
right? Is to try and establish on some level, fill that void of connection.
Absolutely. And it's perhaps not the best strategy, in so much that what's going on is you're seeing these, basically the political tribalism that we're experiencing right now. I think it has a lot to do with this. I think of political tribalism as sort of weaponizing the tribe drive. Because when I think of I'll actually give an example from my classroom. I have a exercise in my classroom where the students rank their identities. And the way you do this in social and psychological studies is by asking them what groups they like identifying with. What groups are you proud to belong to? And what I was trying to get them to do was to create a list, rank it by order of which you're most proud, your classic Likert scale, which are you most proud to belong to? And they'll rank, say half a dozen groups. And then I'm having them wait and look at each one. Is it sub-tribal? Is it a face-to-face group, right? Is it a group that you actually know people face-to-face? Or is it a post-tribal? Is it a ultra-tribal group where it's a group in the abstract that is filled with strangers? So for example, it would be the difference between identifying with your community church and the Roman Catholic Church, right? One is a tribe, one is an intersubjective belief network, and one's an actual physical group. And the scary thing, Lisa, that I discovered is so many of these students were coming back, and when I had them look at the ratio, the proportion of groups that they had that were face-to-face versus totally tribal, it was some students were coming back with all the groups they identify with were tribal groups. They didn't have any face-to-face groups. And so the challenge I have for them and the challenge I have for your listeners is to think about your groups explicitly and try and weight them and give a priority importance to the ones that are actually face-to-face with other human beings, because that's where we know human beings scientifically, it's very robust that when you have strong social networks, it's going to help on a lot of different dimensions in terms of wellness and happiness.
This is amazing what you have your students do. And I would imagine when you talk about this with them and they were like, well, wait a second, I really don't have these connected social relationships that you're talking about. Are you getting feedback that they're reevaluating and shifting?
Yeah,
once
totally.
They're aware?
Yes. And so that's one of the most crucial components of this. And it's why we're having these kinds of conversations together, is the only way to combat an instinct, right, from compelling you to one end or another, is to bring it to the level of awareness, that you're consciously aware of it so that you can gain some purchase of it. And it's not totally controlling you. You have some control over it. And what I've found is that these students are definitely gaining more purchase over their environment because they are understanding it on a conscious level, which I think is crucial.
It's amazing. We're going to need to take a break. And when we come back, we will continue the conversation with Dr. David Samson to learn more about David and his work and his book, Our Tribal Future, How to Channel Our Foundational Human Instincts into a Force for Good. Please go to davidrsamson.com. On Twitter, well, formerly known as Twitter, now it's X, go to @PrimalPrimate, and on Instagram, Primal Primatologist, and on Substack, the Tribe Drive newsletter. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back. And that is a promise.
Just a minute here. Before we take that break, let's talk about the craziness of everyday life and its impact on our hair. Thinning hair is different for everyone, so a one-size-fits-all approach to hair growth just doesn't cut it. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement, with over 1 million people seeing thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding. Nutrafol has 5 formulas that are tailored to your hair's needs to help you achieve visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting the root causes of thinning from within: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism. Take their 3-minute hair wellness quiz for a personalized plan that targets better hair growth through a whole body health approach. Determine the root causes that keep you from reaching your hair potential by analyzing lifestyle, biology, hair history, and environmental triggers. Each physician-formulated product is drug-free and made with high-quality ingredients that are recommended by more than 4,500 doctors and hairstylists nationwide. What I love most about Nutrafol is that in addition to thicker and stronger hair, the ingredients have stopped excessive shedding while helping to improve my sleep, stress response, and those pesky menopause symptoms, including hot flashes. No matter your lifestyle or stage of life, Nutrafol is here to help you keep growing and to help make life a little less hectic with easy online purchasing, no prescriptions or doctor visits required. Free shipping and automated deliveries ensure you'll never miss a day. Join me and more than 1 million others who are committed to keep growing with Nutrafol. Start your hair growth journey today by taking Nutrafol's hair wellness quiz and get your personalized hair plan today. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping at Nutrafol.com/quiz when you enter the promo code HARVESTING. Take the quiz and get started on reaching your hair wellness goals with Nutrafol today. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com/quiz, promo code HARVESTING. That's Nutrafol.com/quiz, promo code HARVESTING. Now let's take that pause. Research tells us that happiness is good for our health. Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Want more sound ideas for better well-being? Check out our new bonus edition content, More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness, available exclusively on Medium and Substack. One thing I know for certain, happiness waits for no one, and at times we all need a little support. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. And we're back, continuing the conversation with Dr. David Samson. We're talking about Tribe Drive, examining human instincts, beliefs, and behaviors. Let's get back to it.
So, David, let's move the conversation towards looking at our tribal future. And you write about something called camp crafting.
Yeah. So this is the idea that any degree in which we can shift towards a more socially connected network is likely going to be one that allows us to thrive and increase our wellness. I call this the principle of intentional proximity. It's fighting that mismatch, right? So fighting that social drift, the kinds of forces that our society, it basically incentivizes for us to disconnect with people. So in our standard growth and development pattern, we end up going to college and potentially finding a pair bond or a mate, moving off to wherever we can find that job. And what it's doing is it's dislocating us from the network by which we grew. And so the incentives are for us to become a disconnected society as opposed to a connected society. And what we're seeing is that there are lots of reasons to kind of fight for that intentional proximity with your social group. So reason of social connection improves your health. This is what we talked about in the last segment. Reason number 2, social connection strengthens. It can actually strengthen your romantic relationship. There's this phenomena called cocooning, where you have, instead of just single people isolating, you have a pair bond isolating. And remember, we evolved in these camps that had lots of people. That was sort of the nuclear camp, was the basic social structure. And so what we're doing is we're putting this inordinate amount of stress and pressure on one human being to be an entire camp. It's supposed to be like, you're supposed to trying to get calories
it's exhausting
together.
Thinking about it.
It's exhausting,
Being
right?
the everything. Yeah.
You have to be everything to be a quote unquote good mate, in which case for 99% of human evolution, you relied on a lot of adults for those roles. So it's really not fair to that person. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to them. And we also know that couples typically are much stronger when they have witnesses to their relationship. It's kind of like, instead you kind of get performative and you present your best self in the relationship, and that's very good for the relationship overall. Reason 3, social connection improves child development. So alloparenting, the studies looking at alloparenting, this is defined as when there are parents besides the genetic parents that have some sort of influence and some sort of role in rearing the child. These children are less anxious. They have better attachments. They have better theory of mind, meaning they can see and understand people's point of view to a higher degree. Their cognitive development is better. And they've measured in these fMRIs, they've measured the size of the amygdala. And this is like your fear response system. Amygdalas are smaller in children that have more alloparents. And this is sort of fundamental to the human condition. And when you rear children in isolation, it has a lot of bad things that can associate to their growth and development. Reason 4, social connection reduces consumption. It improves your quality of life. You can get a lot more bang for your buck if you co-locate or cohabitate with a group of people. Typically, driving is 30% less. You spend 40% less on utilities. It's kind of the philosophy that, you don't need 5 hammers. You only need 1 hammer distributed and shared amongst the group, right? So you can share resources in that kind of way. And it's very much like central place provisioning, like our ancestors did. And then social connection, reason number 5, social connection boosts odds of personal success. So you don't have to be the master of all things because you can leverage people's individual skill sets. They can help you out. Like if you have a buddy who's a project manager, you don't need to know how to project manage because they can help you with that skill set. And then the social resources involved around that as well, that social capital allows you as an individual in the group to attain their goals. And reason number 6, I think maybe the most important, especially for the listeners of the Harvesting Happiness podcast, is that people in social groups like this have greater sense of meaning and purpose. It's not all about the I, it's about what you are also contributing to your identity group, your in group. And so there's all these reasons, and we can actually see it in some really cool classic examples. Are you familiar at all with the Rosetta mystery?
I am not, and I'm so curious.
Yeah, a good mystery is always fun. So I came across this with Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. And he was just, the whole book is about why do certain types of phenomena occur at such extremes? And he brought in a social example, which I totally love because it's an example that gets us to this concept of evolutionary mismatch and being synchronized or desynchronized. And Roseto is a town, and it has primarily a history of Italian immigration. And basically, this doctor by the name of Stuart Wolfe was invited to come to a conference in the 1950s. He went to the town of Rosetta, about 1,500 people. This will be important later. He went to this town, and the doctors there, the local doctors, were making some pretty radical claims like, yeah, we don't have any hypertension here. We don't have any instances of high blood pressure. We don't have any of these things, these non-communicable diseases that are cropping up everywhere in the 1950s in the US. Sort of an epidemic of heart disease and all this stuff. And they were finding the Rosettans were dying of old age. And on top of that, they had almost non-existent crime. They had almost non-existent suicide. And there was just all these different little outliers cropping around that was confounded people. And so Stuart Wolfe set up a 10 years of research in this environment. First, he thought maybe it's the genes. So maybe if we find Rosettans elsewhere that have immigrated to other towns, maybe we'll discover that they're sort of immune. So we'll check that out. That wasn't the case. Rosettans not living in Rosetta were still suffering from all the other things that everybody else was suffering from. It wasn't geography because they started looking at towns that were just adjacent to Rosetta, like right next door, like no difference in the water, right? Like what's going on in the water hypothesis. And they found that these other towns, they were suffering from the same things. It wasn't diet or exercise. They barely exercise. And because they were Italian immigrants, they ate these carb-loaded, fat-loaded diets. So what they found was it was the answer to the Rosetta mystery was actually the level of social integration. This town was at this sweet spot. When we talk about town sizes or group sizes, there's the Dunbar's value. So humans are really good in groups between 30 and 50, likely because we evolved in camps. We're really good at 150 because that's sort of the scaling limit of how many face-to-face relationships we can have. And then 1,500 is your typical tribe size in small-scale societies. And so we found that in Rosetta, they didn't change between 1,500 and 1,800 for like 50 years. So they had this sweet spot in sort of how big the town was. There was 22 civic organizations for both men and women. So they had this deep sort of like commitment to the community and to each other. They were, of course, they had the same tribal signals because they were all the 77% were of the Roman Catholic religion. So their religious rituals, their religious shaman, who was their Catholic priest, prominent member of the community. And they performed these rituals where they exercised their social norms and their sacred values every week together. And this is definitely one of the ways to export a sense of cohesion amongst a group. 24% were living with a spouse, 55% had lived there their entire lives, 70% had children living with the parents. So they had intergenerational living. And a vast majority said when they had problems, they wouldn't go to the state. They would go to their family to solve them. So again, this is just a beautiful example of how understanding our natural history in human evolution gives us sort of a key to the recipe to how to find environments that help us thrive in the 21st century.
This is fascinating. I want to go back to something you said about the kids. When they're raised in communities where there are more parental figures than just the parents, because it struck me that what you have you're building more curious people. When you have more people who are influencing a child's development, kids become more curious, more resilient, better problem solvers, better learners, because they're getting influences from multiple sources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we're talking about mental immunity, to kind of segue there, because we're almost out of time, if we're looking to build better thinkers or more fit thinkers, what you're talking about, that this tribal network, is important for us to reevaluate the kinds of tribes that we want to belong to.
Oh, that's absolutely right, Lisa. We want to belong to the kinds of tribes that are communities of inquiry, right? We want to belong to the kinds of intersubjective belief networks that aren't 100% sure of what reality is. There's some level of perhaps we can change our ideas. Perhaps we can be malleable when new evidence comes into play. And that, of course, is one of the goals and the missions of CIRCE and Andy Norman's work with mental immunity that I really look forward to discussing.
And I think the point of CIRCE is to create flexible, open-minded, less judgmental humans that can work together for the greater good, to seek more of where the Venn diagram overlaps than our differences.
Absolutely. And we'll need to figure out what the right tribal signals are and the right sacred values for our tribe. We'll need to figure out what those are so that we can, in concert, march towards that.
You write for CIRCE and participate in CIRCE regarding tribalism vaccination. And I would love to kind of dangle that before we close in front of our listeners.
Yeah. So this idea is that essentially what we have right now at scale in society is another state of sort of tribal mismatch where basically our tribe drive is being politicized and weaponized in a way that's harming our capacity to be able to judge good ideas from bad ideas. And so that's going to be the thrust of our conversation when we talk about the tribe drive and the tribalism vaccine.
And with that, to learn more, jump on over to Substack, where we have created a joint venture between Harvesting Happiness and CIRCE, Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative, to carry on the conversation with my guest today, Dr. David Samson. We're talking about his book, Our Tribal Future, How to Channel Our Foundational Human Instincts into a Force for Good. To learn more, please visit davidrsamson.com. On Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter or whatnot. Go to @PrimalPrimate on Instagram, @PrimalPrimatologist, and on David's Substack, you can find him at the Tribe Drive newsletter. David, thanks a million for being with me today.
Oh, my pleasure, Lisa. Anytime.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers-Kamen on behalf of my guest, Dr. David Samson, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another. Want to take a deeper dive into sound ideas for better well-being? Check out our new bonus edition content, More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness, available exclusively on Medium and Substack. Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime, anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes from wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by me, Lisa Cypers-Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the awesome team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.